Brian never imagined that opening his stepmother's door one night would change the course of his family forever. He thought she'd tell him to leave her alone, but instead, she softly asked him to close the door. What she whispered after that would shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew. Brian had always felt like an outsider in his own home. His mother had passed away when he was just 12, and his father remarried far too quickly. Lauren, his new stepmother, was strikingly beautiful, barely older than his oldest sister, and seemed to glide through life with a kind of polished grace that didn't quite belong in their small town. People whispered that she had married his father for money, but no one dared say it to their faces. The tension came to a head during the 4th of July. The Carter family was known for throwing elaborate parties, with music, lights, catered food, and fireworks that could be seen across town. Brian, home from college and recovering from a painful breakup, watched Lauren float through the crowd in a daring red dress, laughing and dancing as though she were the star of the night. It was later, long after the party ended, that Brian found himself outside her room. He hadn't planned on stopping, but he heard muffled sounds from inside. Thinking she was upset, he knocked. Her response was quiet but clear, "Close the door." When he stepped inside, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her makeup smudged, not from tears, but from the long evening. When he asked if she was all right, she turned to him and whispered something that stunned him: his father was cheating on her. At first he didn't believe it, but she told him about the texts, the hotel receipts, the late-night excuses. The other woman was someone who worked in one of his father's offices. For Brian, who had never been close to his father, it was a different kind of betrayal, one that stung deeply. Lauren confessed that she had given up everything for this marriage, and in that moment, he believed her. That was his first mistake. Over the following weeks, Brian and Lauren grew closer. It began innocently, walks around the property, quiet talks while his father was away. She shared stories of her past, how she had worked her way through school and met Greg at a charity event. She insisted she hadn't married him for wealth, but for the version of him that no longer existed. For Brian, still wounded from his own heartbreak, she became someone who listened, someone who seemed to care. One warm evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, they sat together on the porch. Lauren looked at him with a strange, searching expression. She told him he reminded her of the man his father used to be: kind, gentle, thoughtful. The words unsettled him, yet something in her voice pulled him closer. Brian laughed nervously and told her maybe he was just a rough draft of the man his father used to be. Lauren smiled softly and shook her head. "No," she said, "you're the version I would have chosen." Her words lingered in the air longer than they should have, making Brian restless long into the night. The next morning, he thought about leaving early and heading back to campus, but then his sister Jess sent him a message. She was in New York, but rumors had already reached her ears. People had seen their father at the Hyatt Hotel with another woman. "It's real, B," she wrote. That evening, Brian confronted his father. At first, Greg denied everything, but eventually he admitted the truth with a shrug, as if it were just another business deal gone wrong. "It's complicated," he said, swirling his scotch. "Lauren and I haven't been close for a long time." "You mean you got bored?" Brian snapped, anger breaking through. Greg gave a bitter laugh. "I'm not proud of it. But marriage isn't what people think it is. Don't act like you understand." "Maybe I don't," Brian replied, "but I know betrayal when I see it." What Brian didn't realize was that betrayal was more layered than he thought. The very next night, Lauren came into his room. She didn't look seductive, nor manipulative, she looked broken. Her voice trembled as she told him she wanted a divorce, but Greg had threatened to leave her with nothing. The prenuptial agreement she signed protected all his assets. "It's legal," she said bitterly, "but it isn't moral." Her eyes lifted to meet his, shining with both fear and defiance. "Unless," she stopped. "Unless what?" Brian asked cautiously, though he already suspected what she meant. "Unless we give him a reason to regret everything." The suggestion hung in the air, dangerous and heavy. What shocked Brian most wasn't her words, it was how much he wanted to agree. He didn't say yes, but he didn't tell her no either. And that was his second mistake. The days that followed blurred together. Brian tried to keep his distance, jogging in the mornings, hiding in the guest house, even distracting himself by writing again, songs, poems, anything to quiet his thoughts. Yet every time he saw Lauren, he noticed something unspoken in her expression: desire, revenge, loneliness. One afternoon, he found a folded note slipped under his bedroom door. It was from her. This isn't just about your father, it read. It's about the version of me I lost in this house. I want to take something back. Just one thing. Something that was never his to own. Brian read the words again and again until their meaning settled heavily inside him. This wasn't only about betrayal, it was about her trying to reclaim control of her own life. That night, he walked into her room. She didn't explain, didn't make speeches. She simply looked at him and whispered the same words she had spoken before. Close the door. Brian closed the door, but what happened next wasn't passion, it was confession. Lauren began to reveal everything she had kept buried. She spoke of Greg's offshore accounts, his hidden wealth, and how he manipulated contracts to his advantage. She told Brian she had enough information to destroy him, but doing so would come with collateral damage. I need help, she admitted, her voice steady. Not just emotionally, strategically. I want out, but I want to walk away with power. Brian wasn't versed in finance, but he knew someone who was. His sister Jess had built a career in corporate law. The next morning, he called her, careful not to give away too much. I need advice, he said, about prenups and hidden assets. There was a pause on the other end before Jess replied, is this about Dad? Brian hesitated. Kind of. She promised she'd come home that weekend. What Brian didn't realize was that inviting Jess back was the biggest mistake of all. Because Lauren wasn't playing one person, she was playing all of them. Jess arrived Friday evening, just as a storm moved over the hills behind the Carter estate. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and electricity. She stepped inside, her sharp eyes immediately studying Brian. You look like someone in over his head, she said flatly. He forced a weak smile. You have no idea. Inside, Lauren welcomed Jess warmly, almost too warmly, dressed in a cream sweater dress that struck the perfect balance between elegance and vulnerability. Jess wasn't convinced. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, yet. That night, the three of them sat together in the sunroom. Greg was away again, another so-called business trip that none of them believed anymore. Over glasses of wine, Lauren finally addressed the tension directly. Thank you for coming, she said, looking Jess straight in the eye. I know you've never trusted me. Jess didn't soften. I've always been skeptical of anyone who marries my father less than a year after our mother's funeral. Lauren accepted the jab with a faint smile. Fair, but I asked you here because Brian thought you could help, not because I expect your trust. Jess glanced at her brother, who shifted uncomfortably, but Lauren didn't falter. She placed a neat stack of photocopied papers on the table. These are expense reports, transfers, and property deeds I managed to access. If you compare them to Greg's reported income, you'll see something doesn't add up. Jess leaned forward, scanning the documents. Her eyes narrowed as she realized what they implied. If this is genuine, he's hiding millions. Lauren nodded slowly. In shell companies. Fake charities. He's smarter than most people think. Jess leaned back, her tone sharper now. So what's your endgame? Lauren hesitated for a long moment, then turned her gaze toward Brian. Her voice was calm, but the words cut through the silence. The prenuptial says if I'm unfaithful, I walk away with nothing. Lauren explained that if Greg's infidelity could be proven, she would be entitled to a settlement. It wouldn't make her rich, but it would be enough to start over. The problem was that most of the proof she once had mysteriously disappeared. The paper trail was gone. I need someone who can help me rebuild it, she said quietly. Someone who knows how to think like a Carter. Jess leaned back, her jaw tight. So you want me to outwit my own father? I want you to help someone escape him, Lauren replied evenly. The words hung heavy between them. Later that night, Jess called Brian into her room. She didn't waste time. All right, tell me the truth. Why are you really involved in this? Brian hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to confess everything, the nights, the closeness, the temptation. She needs help, he said instead. Jess studied him carefully, her eyes sharp. You like her. It's not like that, he muttered. Isn't it? She pressed. He turned away, unable to answer. You're too smart for this, Brian, she said firmly. She's dangerous. She's not, he shot back. She is. Maybe not with a weapon in her hand, but with secrets. With charm. With the way she makes herself look vulnerable. That's the weapon women like her use. You don't know her, Brian argued weakly. Jess shook her head. I don't need to. I know the pattern. Brian left without responding, but just before he shut the door behind him, Jess's voice followed in a low warning, don't be the next casualty. Despite her caution, Jess still helped. Over the next few days, she combed through the documents Lauren had gathered. She traced money through fake LLCs, connected transactions to offshore accounts, and even uncovered a hidden apartment in a nearby town, the same place where Erin, Greg's rumored mistress, was living. One morning, Jess set the papers down with a heavy sigh. "This is enough," she said. "We could bury him in court." Lauren didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She only looked exhausted, as though winning came with a weight heavier than losing. Lauren insisted she didn't want to ruin Greg completely. "I don't want to destroy him," she said quietly. "I just want to walk away with something." Jess gave a slow nod. "Then let's do it." Together, they arranged a meeting with a divorce attorney for the following week. For the first time, it seemed like a plan was forming, one that might free Lauren without leaving her empty-handed. But 2 nights before the meeting, everything shifted. Brian had gone into town for a late coffee when he saw someone he never expected, Erin. His father's supposed mistress wasn't alone. She was walking hand in hand with another man. They laughed easily, leaned into each other, and shared a kiss that looked nothing like an affair in hiding. They looked like a couple in love. Brian stood frozen, watching the scene play out, his mind scrambling to make sense of it. When he returned home, he went straight to Jess. "No way," she said when he told her. "Are you sure it was her?" 100%, Brian answered firmly. "She's cheating on Dad, with someone else." Jess leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing as the information settled. Slowly, a smile began to form on her lips. "That changes things." Brian frowned. "How?" "If Erin is unfaithful herself, and Lauren can tie that to Greg, it flips the entire situation on its head." Brian shook his head. "But how do we prove it?" Jess didn't hesitate long. She looked at him with quiet calculation and said, "Then, we don't." Jess picked up her phone with a knowing look. "She does," she said simply. Within the hour, Lauren was sitting with them in Jess's room. She listened as Jess laid out the discovery, then gave a slow nod. "So all I have to do is catch the mistress cheating on the man who's cheating on me?" Lauren asked dryly. "Exactly," Jess confirmed. Lauren let out a small laugh, one that carried both bitterness and amusement. "Oh, the irony. They staged the plan carefully." Jess shadowed Erin for 2 days, documenting everything, photos of her at restaurants, short videos of her slipping into a hotel with the mystery man, even timestamps and locations that made the affair undeniable. To seal it, they hired a private investigator to gather formal evidence. But while the plan was unfolding, something darker was happening in the background. Brian began receiving anonymous messages. At first, they were vague. "You think you know her?" Then, "She's not the victim." The third message came with an audio file. Hesitant, Brian pressed play. It was Lauren's voice, but not the voice he knew. Not soft, not wounded. This voice was cold, calculating. "If I play my cards right, I get the house and the sympathy. Jess hates me, but that's fine. Brian is the easy one." Brian froze, the sound stabbing through him. His chest tightened, his pulse hammered. He played it again, hoping he'd imagined it, but there was no mistake. It was her. That night, he confronted Lauren. His hands shook as he repeated the words he'd heard. She didn't deny them. She only met his gaze with unsettling calm and said, "I said what I had to someone I didn't trust." Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you trust me, Brian?" And for the first time since this began, he realized he no longer knew the answer. The day of the lawyers' meeting finally came. Lauren arrived dressed in a sharp navy suit, her posture steady, her face calm but unreadable. Greg, freshly back from another business trip, walked in unprepared for what awaited him. The moment he saw Jess seated beside Lauren, he let out a bitter laugh. "So this is a family affair now?" he sneered. Lauren's voice cut through the room, steady and cold. "No, this is justice." Piece by piece, Jess laid everything on the table like a seasoned prosecutor, records of offshore accounts, hidden assets, and finally, the damning photographs and recordings of Erin's betrayal. Greg's face drained of color as the evidence piled higher. Even his lawyer stammered, unable to find a way out. Lauren leaned across the table, her voice low and deliberate. "We can keep this quiet, dignified, or you can drag us through a public scandal. The choice is yours." Greg's eyes flicked between Jess and Brian, searching for support, but Brian refused to look at him. Silence stretched heavy in the room until Greg finally broke. Defeated, he signed the agreement, a quiet settlement that left Lauren with the money and stability she needed, her reputation untarnished. But victories rarely came without losses. A week after the ink dried, Lauren visited Brian one last time. She stood in his doorway, her eyes softer than he'd seen them in months. "I know you hate me now," she said quietly. "But I never lied about needing help. I never lied about being afraid." Brian's chest tightened. "What about caring?" he asked. "Was that a lie too?" For a moment, she faltered. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, in a whisper, she answered, "No. That was the one real thing." And then she turned and walked away. He never saw her again. Months later, Brian returned to college, carrying a heaviness he couldn't quite shake. Jess took a new job at a firm in Boston, determined to start over. Greg moved into a small condo and quietly began therapy, a man broken but perhaps finally willing to confront himself. The family never fully healed. Too much had been said, too much revealed. Yet sometimes, Brian realized, the wound itself became the teacher, offering lessons that peace never could. Through it all, he kept only one reminder from that summer, a worn notebook filled with scribbles, secrets, and truths he wasn't ready to forget. Inside the notebook were pages of music he had written in the middle of all that chaos. Melodies scribbled in the margins, fragments of lyrics, half-finished lines, pieces of himself that had survived when everything else was falling apart. On the very first page, in faded ink, was a single sentence he could never erase from his memory. She said, "Close the door," and then whispered, "Don't let me be forgotten." And he never did. This story reveals how betrayal can ripple through a family in unexpected ways. What began as Lauren's fight to escape a dishonest marriage turned into a tangled web of secrets, manipulation, and shifting loyalties. Jess and Brian uncovered truths about their father's mistress, and in doing so, saw their mother's pain in a new light. Yet, the discovery of Lauren's cold calculation showed that even victims can hide sharp edges. In the end, Greg lost his power, Lauren secured her freedom, and the children were left to carry the scars of everything that unfolded. The settlement ended the marriage, but it could not restore what had been broken between them as a family. For Brian, music became the only way to process the weight of it all, and in his notebook he carried the last trace of Lauren's vulnerability, a reminder that even in betrayal, some emotions had been real. The conclusion is bittersweet. Justice was won, but healing was not. This story stands as a testament to how infidelity doesn't just shatter marriages, it reshapes families, leaving behind lessons that are as painful as they are unforgettable. Disclaimer: this story is a dramatized narrative created purely for entertainment and educational purposes. While inspired by themes of relationships, betrayal, and personal conflict, all characters, names, and events are fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events is entirely coincidental. The aim is not to promote or justify infidelity but to explore the emotional realities and consequences that can arise from broken trust. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional journey. This story reminds us that betrayal doesn't end with two people, it echoes through families, reshaping lives in ways no one expects. Sometimes the truth brings freedom, but it rarely brings peace. We appreciate your time and support. If this story touched you or made you reflect, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of love, loss, and infidelity. Your engagement keeps these voices alive and helps us continue sharing stories that matter. See you in the next story.